Have you ever been in one of those situations, like maybe it's a high-stakes strategy meeting at work, or even just a really intense personal disagreement in your living room where you make an absolutely airtight logical point?
Oh, yeah. You have all the facts.
Right. You have the facts, you have the data, you have laid out the entire architecture of your argument perfectly. But because you sounded just a little too passionate, or maybe your voice shook for like half a second, the person sitting across from you just completely ignores your logic.
They don't even engage with it.
Exactly. Instead, they just look at you, tilt their head, and say something condescending like, wow, you seem really upset right now.
It is, frankly, an incredibly isolating experience. I
Mm.
mean, you spent all this energy constructing a flawless argument, and the moment you show that you actually care about the outcome,
Yeah.
the argument itself just, well, it evaporates into thin air.
It is deeply relatable, and honestly, it's
No.
maddening. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating collection of source material centered around a concept titled The Emotional Calibration Problem: How Much Feeling is Safe to Give.
It's such a great text.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out the hidden mechanics of emotional expression. Like, we are going to unpack exactly why caring too much can actually sabotage your credibility, and more importantly, how you can strategically wield your emotions so you don't lose your argument and, you don't lose your authentic self in the process.
Which is a vital skill for anyone trying to navigate complex relationships or corporate hierarchies. What is so validating about this material is the realization that this dynamic we've all experienced, it's not just an accident of bad communication.
Right, it's not just you messing up.
Exactly. It is a structural reality of human interaction. Like
Eh,
when your logic is dismissed because of your passion, you aren't just imagining things. There's a very specific mechanism at play here.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core of this issue revolves around what the text calls the central paradox. And it is a pretty tough reality to accept
It really is.
because the very thing that makes you most human, your emotion, your genuine care, your deep investment in resolving a problem, is the exact mechanism by which your logic gets dismissed.
Right. When you express deep investment in a conversation, a secondary narrative is immediately created in the room.
A secondary narrative.
Yeah. So think of your primary narrative as your actual argument, right? The numbers, the historical facts, the structural logic. But the moment surplus emotion enters your voice, this secondary narrative appears. And that narrative is simply, oh, this person is emotional.
And that just takes over.
Completely. In most professional and even personal contexts, human brains are wired to let that secondary narrative completely overshadow the primary one.
I kept thinking of this like a magician's misdirection.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Imagine you hand someone a beautifully wrapped box that is just full of undeniable hard facts. You are literally handing them the truth. But instead of opening the box to look at the facts, the person just stands there critiquing your wrapping paper. They're
Sure.
saying, wow, you used way too much tape here. The corners are frayed. You must be really stressed out. And you're just standing there screaming internally, just open the box.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it.
Mm.
You're handing them a complex reality, and they are choosing to look at the packaging. There is actually a specific term for this mechanism in the source material. It's called the surplus emotion transfer.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly is being transferred?
It really comes down to cognitive load. When you show emotion that exceeds what the room considers strictly neutral, that surplus emotion, the listener is presented with a subconscious choice.
Like a fork in the road.
Exactly. They can engage with your complex, difficult logic, which requires energy, it requires critical thinking, and maybe even admitting they are wrong.
Or they can take the easy way out.
Precisely. They can engage with your feelings. And engaging with your feelings is almost always easier because it requires absolutely no logical apparatus. They just transfer the focus of the entire interaction away from the problem and onto your emotional state.
So it's basically an intellectual escape hatch. Like if I don't want to deal with your spreadsheet, I can just deal with your tone of voice.
Exactly. And our sources outline 4 very specific ways people use this escape hatch. They are essentially dismissal moves that weaponize your care against you.
Let's walk through what these actually sound like in the real world, because I guarantee everyone listening has heard at least one of these.
Oh, absolutely.
So the first move is pathologizing.
Right. Pathologizing happens when the other person treats your passion as a symptom of a malfunction. Like they might say, you're getting too worked up to think clearly about
Ah,
this.
I've heard that one.
We all have. What they are doing is systematically invalidating your intellect by framing your emotion as a cognitive impairment.
Which is infuriating. And I feel like it leads right into the second move, which is superiority positioning.
Yes, the classic high ground.
Right. This is the person who leans back in their chair, crosses their arms, and says, well, I'm not as emotionally invested in this as you are, so I think I'm seeing it a bit more objectively.
Notice what happens structurally in that moment, though.
Hmm.
They are claiming the intellectual high ground purely by claiming to care less. They haven't offered a better argument, they've just offered a colder temperature.
Wow.
And the problem is, in our society, we often confuse a cold temperature with a correct answer.
That makes total sense.
Yeah,
Now, the third move is dismissal by proxy. This sounds like you're making this personal and I'm not interested in going there.
that is a classic deflection. They are moving the boundary of the conversation.
Right.
By declaring that you have made it personal, they just completely absolve themselves of the responsibility to answer your professional or logical critique.
But the fourth one, I have to say, this is the one that really gets under my skin. Concern performance.
Oh, the faux compassionate dismissal. It is incredibly effective.
It really is. Imagine you're outlining a critical failure in a project, and your boss just softens their eyes, tilts their head, and says, I'm really worried about you. This project seems to be taking a massive toll on your mental health.
Right, it sounds so nice.
It sounds kind on the surface, but it is entirely destructive to your argument, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because it is said in a way that slams the intellectual door completely shut. There is no coming back to the data after someone performs concern for your well-being.
You're just trapped.
You are. What's fascinating here is that this isn't accidental clumsiness. It is a subtle, socially condoned form of communication violence. The person using these moves is abandoning the logic you carried into the room and using your own humanity as the evidence that you are wrong or unstable.
So this naturally leads to a massive question for you, the listener. Why does this work so well? I mean, why does society let people get away with critiquing the wrapping paper instead of opening the box?
It all rests on a very persistent cultural myth. Culturally, we are taught to view emotion and reason as opposite ends of a single spectrum.
Like a seesaw.
Exactly. The assumption is that as your emotion increases, your capacity for reason automatically decreases.
But wait, I have to push back on conventional wisdom here because, I mean, if you think about how life actually works, shouldn't someone who has lived with a problem, someone who has real stakes and passion, be more trustworthy than someone who doesn't care at all?
You would think so.
Right. If you and I are arguing about a policy that dictates how I do my job every single day, my passion isn't a distraction. My passion is proof that I have tested this reality, I've lived it.
Your pushback is entirely correct, and it hits on the core tragedy of this dynamic. Emotion isn't the opposite of reason. Emotion is information.
It's data.
Yes, it is critical data about value, about priority, about what actually matters and why. Deep investment usually produces the most careful thinking precisely because the stakes are real. A person who can speak passionately and precisely is incredibly rare and, frankly, should be highly trusted.
But they aren't.
No, they are not, because society does not reward lived experience in these debates. Society rewards the performance of detachment.
The performance of detachment. That phrase alone explains so many corporate boardrooms.
Think about hierarchical environments.
Mm-hmm.
Looking like you have nothing to lose signals a lack of bias. People look at the detached person, the person who seems entirely unfazed by the outcome, and they think, well, they have no skin in the game, so they must be neutral.
Right.
We falsely equate that appearance of neutrality with authority.
Right. So the tragic incentive structure is that the more you genuinely understand and care about something, the more you are penalized for showing it.
Sadly, yes.
And the less you care, the more credible you appear. It is basically a game of pretending not to care so people will take your ideas seriously.
Which brings us to a really difficult dilemma. If society punishes emotion and rewards detachment, the logical answer for the listener might seem to be, fine, I will suppress everything. I will walk into my next performance review or my next argument with my spouse, and I will act like a literal robot.
But that is a trap too. If you just shut down and suppress everything, it creates a completely different kind of friction. People feel alienated.
I absolutely do.
When a human being is completely absent from their own speech, we intuitively sense it and it produces deep distrust. You fall into this uncanny valley where people think you are hiding something. So if we can't be purely passionate and we can't be robots, what is the actual solution?
The solution is what the text calls a calibrated, strategic, purposeful, emotional signal. You cannot just broadcast your feelings indiscriminately.
Mm.
You have to give exactly the quantity of emotion that the specific situation can metabolize.
Okay.
And to calculate that exact dosage, there are 4 variables you need to weigh before you walk into the room.
Let's break those down because this is where it gets incredibly practical. The first variable you have to weigh is your relationship history with the person.
Right. Have you and this person had emotional exposure before? And crucially, what did they do with it?
Oh, that's key.
It is. If you have a colleague who has a track record of pivoting away from your data to manage your tone, you have to factor that into your dosage. Denying them your emotion in that scenario isn't cruelty or being closed off.
Yeah.
It is accuracy.
It is accuracy. I really appreciate that reframing. You aren't being cold, you are just accurately reading historical data. So the second variable is the stakes and the setting. Basically, you have to read the room.
Exactly. Every room has a formal ceiling for emotion. A formal quarterly board meeting has a much lower emotional ceiling than a one-on-one coffee with a trusted peer.
Sure.
If you exceed the ceiling of the room will reject the argument. It's not a personal rejection of your feelings. It is just a contextual norm you have to respect if you want your logic to survive.
Makes sense. The third variable is the nature of the point you are making. You have to ask yourself, does this specific argument need emotional texture?
Yes, sometimes you are advocating for a team that is burning out, and the listener needs to feel the weight of that exhaustion to understand why the policy needs to change.
Right, the emotion is the point.
Exactly. But other times, you are arguing about budget reallocation. In that case, pure structural clarity is better. Emotion would just dilute the precision of the math.
And the fourth variable is about self-preservation. It's asking yourself, what can you afford to lose?
This is perhaps the most important one. Generosity requires a surplus. If giving your genuine emotional energy to a conversation is going to cost you your equilibrium, your sense of self, or your professional credibility, then giving it isn't being generous, it's self-depletion.
Wow.
Don't drain your own batteries for an audience that won't appreciate the light.
Speaking of giving emotional energy, there's one specific emotional dose that we really need to highlight because it completely upends how we usually think about communication. It's called the sympathy trap.
This is a fascinating dynamic. We're generally taught that showing sympathy, showing care for the other person's experience is universally good. It builds connection.
Yeah, that's what all the management books say.
Right. But in high-stakes dynamics, showing care for the other person can profoundly backfire.
Wait, really? If I am in an intense negotiation and I pause to say, I completely understand how stressful this deadline is for you, I think I'm building a bridge. Why does that backfire?
It backfires in 2 distinct ways, depending on the power dynamic in the room. The first backfire happens in adversarial or highly competitive situations. If you show sympathy to an adversary, it is frequently read as weakness.
Because you are signaling that you care about their feelings, which means they now have a lever to pull.
Exactly. You have handed them leverage. They now know your Vandry is permeable to their discomfort, and a purely competitive person will exploit that vulnerability.
But what about when it's not strictly adversarial? Like, what if it's just a peer or a manager?
That leads to the second backfire, where your sympathy is read as condescension. Have you ever been really frustrated about something, and someone looks at you and says, I completely understand why you feel that way, but the tone just makes your skin crawl?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. It feels like a power move. It doesn't feel like empathy. It feels like containment.
Precisely. It lands as superiority. They are placing themselves above your feeling in order to analyze it. You feel handled rather than actually heard,
That is so true.
which highlights a deeply tragic disconnect in our society. The genuine experience of sympathy is a beautiful human encounter, but the performance of sympathy is a social script. And someone who is coldly performing care without actually feeling it is often rewarded as being a great manager, while your genuine, profound care might be completely weaponized against you.
Okay, so if we know how to calculate our emotional dosage and we know to avoid the sympathy trap, I want to shift our focus to the architecture of the argument itself. How do we actually deliver our points structurally to make sure they land without triggering that surplus emotion transfer?
This brings us to a strategy called emotional monotone.
Now, let's be very clear because monotone sounds terrible.
It does.
It sounds like we're telling people to be Ferris Bueller's economics teacher. Like anyone. But this isn't about being dead inside, is it?
It's not at all. Emotional monotone is a deliberate presentation layer. Your interior remains fully awake, highly passionate, and deeply informed by what matters to you.
Okay.
But what is visible on the surface stays consistent, measured, and rigorously paced. You are deliberately removing that surplus heat from your voice and your body language.
I picture this like transporting precious cargo. Using emotional monotone is like taking your most valuable, vibrant, fragile ideas and locking them inside a plain, heavy, unbranded steel lockbox before you walk into the building.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Thanks. The ideas inside aren't dead. They are incredibly alive. But by putting them in an unbranded lockbox, you ensure that thieves, or in this case bad faith listeners, won't get distracted by the packaging. You deny them the ability to gaslight you.
That is exactly the utility of it. If their usual tactic is to tell you that you are too sensitive, removing your emotional expression completely removes their avenue of entry. The logic stands completely alone in the center of the room. They have to deal with your argument, or they have to openly retreat.
That's powerful. And if we connect this idea of structural control to the way we actually write our presentations or plan our talking points, there is another brilliant concept here. The difference between big titles and storylines.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is about how human beings actually process and accept new information.
Right.
There is a fundamental psychological difference between stating a conclusion and earning one.
Right.
Big titles are your bold statements, your dramatic claims, the ultimate verdict. You can say a big title in 3 seconds.
For example, walking into a room and saying, our current marketing strategy is a complete failure and we needed to fund it. That's a big title.
Exactly. But storylines are the context, the nuance, the granular data, and the journey of how you actually arrived at that conclusion.
And the danger of leading with a big title is that it invites immediate preemptive rejection. Like if you walk in and drop a massive aggressive conclusion on the table, the listener's brain is going to react defensively. They might decide in a split second that you are wrong. And if they decide you are wrong in the first 10 seconds, they are not going to stick around to listen to your storyline. Your nuance is entirely dead on arrival because they've already closed the case.
Effective communicators understand that comprehension has to be built. You don't announce your final destination right away. You bring the listener into the experience of the journey.
Step by step.
Exactly. You lay out the data points, you explore the context together, step by step, so that by the time you finally state the conclusion, it feels like an inevitable truth that you both mutually discovered. You earn the conclusion rather than declaring it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've talked about calculating your dose, using emotional monotone, and relying on storylines instead of big titles. But we have to confront the most sobering reality of all of this. What happens if the person across the table has already judged you before you even open your mouth?
This is known as the preemptive verdict problem, and it is the hardest scenario to navigate. If you have a long history with someone or they carry a deep-seated bias, they might have already pre-assigned you an identity.
Wow.
They have decided before you even walk into the room that you are the emotional one.
And the tragedy here is that if someone has pre-dismissed you based on that premise, no communication technique in the world can fully save you.
Because the premise absorbs all contradictory evidence.
Right.
If you walk in using your flawless emotional monotone and you use your perfect storylines and your logic is absolutely undeniable,
Yeah.
a deeply biased listener will just look at you and think, look at them, see? They are being so careful right now because they know they're too emotional. They weaponize your precision as more evidence for their flawed premise.
It is maddening. You literally cannot win the external game. Which brings us to a really profound question for you, the listener. If you are ever in a situation where the other person is fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you, what do you owe yourself?
You owe yourself emotional sovereignty. When the external game is unwinnable, the goal of communication shifts. The goal is no longer to make your emotions perfectly legible and acceptable to everyone else.
Then what is it?
The primary goal becomes internal clarity. It is knowing exactly what you feel, understanding why you feel it, and choosing deliberately what you are willing to share and what you need to protect.
It's about coherence over legibility. You aren't suppressing your emotions, you are bringing them into alignment. Your interior experience and your exterior expression are aligned. There is no gap between what you feel and what you say, even if what you say is carefully, strategically curated.
That alignment is what we call divine integrity. You know your own internal landscape so intimately that your humanity is organized. It isn't scattered. You stop handing your feelings over to people who haven't earned the right to hold them.
I love that.
In that state of sovereignty, you are the source. Your signal is clear. What the listener chooses to do with that signal is entirely their problem.
So bringing this all together for you, The next time you are preparing for a high-stakes meeting, or you find yourself in a really tough conversation with a partner, you now have a new framework. You can recognize the exact moment someone tries to pull a surplus emotion transfer on you.
Exactly.
You know how to pause, read the room, and calculate your emotional dosage. You understand the power of locking your ideas in an unbranded steel lockbox of emotional monotone. And you know how to use storylines to build comprehension before you drop your big titles. And most importantly, you know how to protect your interior world.
This raises an important question, though, something for us to really chew on as we look at the bigger picture. If our competitive environments, our corporate hierarchies, and our social structures consistently reward the performance of detachment over the reality of genuine care, what is the long-term cost to our society?
Oh, that's heavy.
Right, if the people who care the most, the people with the deepest lived experience and the most profound passion, are systematically forced to hide that passion in an unbranded lockbox just to be heard, are we slowly engineering the passion out of our most important decision-making rooms?
That is a chilling thought to leave on. If the people who care most have to sound like they care the least, what kind of decisions are we ultimately making? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the next time you hand someone the facts, do not let them critique your wrapping paper. Keep your logic sharp, keep your emotional interior safe, and we will see you next time.